they imagine that we want to do to them what they have done to us, right? It's why people in the South who were enslavers only imagined a world after slavery as a world of vengeance and violence and rape and pillage because of the rape and violence they had done to others. They could only imagine a future where they would be harmed the way they had done harm. So they can't imagine a future outside of the harm, right? They keep imagining that we want to do to them what they want to do to us.
Cristina Beltrán is a political science professor at NYU and author of several books focusing on the Latino American experience. This was a very unexpected conversation, one that got deep into how we conceive of ourselves within America and within our moral absolutes. It was a challenging and often fascinating discussion that I did not expect, but what I came to see is how much I love the way Cristina thinks, what she believes is possible, and how she gets to that conclusion. I hope you enjoy. This is The Other Pod. Hey, how are you?
Good, good. We made it.
We made it. I mean, it was questionable at points today, so thank you for your accommodations. I really appreciate it.
Oh, sure.
Thank you. How are you doing?
Good, good. Just got back from Vancouver.
Yes, I know. I saw your email. Thank you.
So
What were you
British
doing
Columbia.
there?
It was for the American Political Science Annual Meeting. So
Oh,
there were
interesting.
10,000 political scientists there, a lot of
Oh,
political scientists, but it was great. It was really wonderful panels and seeing friends and, in these crazy times, it's really nice to be with people you care about, so it was super nice.
as I understand it, you were born to parents both of Mexican ancestry. You grew up in Southern California and New Mexico in the 70s. Your
Mhm.
parents were very politically and socially active.
Mhm.
And what about their sense of identity and their ideas of equality appealed to you? And how have you made those your own?
That's such an interesting, great question. Um, and thanks for just even having me on this. This is great. It's just really fun to get a chance to talk about these issues in a kind of, public. I spend a lot of my time as an academic. It's either in the classroom or in the books or articles. So it's lovely to get to talk about it in this context. Yeah, so my parents got married when they were 19 and they right out of high school in 1958. And they both had to get jobs immediately. And I always think about the fact that they were of a generation of Mexican Americans born. My dad was born in Texas. My mom was born in New Mexico, both in small towns. My dad was born in Clinton. My mom was born in Las Vegas. And they were born at a time in 1940. They were born at a time when, it was still, this is still Jim Crow. This is, before we were even in World War II. And they grew up in a time where when they graduated from high school in the late 50s, there was really no avenue for they were incredibly smart, intelligent, excited, vibrant, vital, interesting young people. And being born in the late 50s and coming in California at a public school in the San Fernando Valley, nobody cared about their intellectual ambitions. Like they were the children of my dad was the children of immigrants who were farm workers. My mom was the present, I know that the child of a house painter, and a woman who, mostly was taking care of the six kids she had. So they were just sort of placed in work. They had to go to work, right? And the fact that their dreams of going to college, had they been born even 10 years later, if they'd been born in 1958 or 1950, I mean, they would have had really different lives because by the late 1960s, there would have been an infrastructure for them to go to college. So I always think about the fact that it's not just about your desires, it's about the opportunity structures. And they had much more limited opportunity structures. But we're very ambitious people. So my dad went on and got a job at an auto plant. GM Van Nuys was an auto plant nearby, began working on the line in a union job, and then got active in the union and got recruited into more union leadership over time, and really fell in love with the politics of Walter Reuther and the civil rights movement and Martin Luther King. And I always said if my dad had like three like saints, like the Father, Son, Holy Ghost, it would be like Walter Reuther, Emiliano Zapata, and Martin Luther King. That was his like, combo. And my mom was getting involved in healthcare issues. She was working at a hospital. She was always an incredibly voracious reader. So as the world got more political in the late 60s and 70s, they got drawn into that. But they were already, they had me already. They were doing this as young adults. So their commitments to things like civil rights and justice in a broad sense, but then also in the sense of what had happened in the history of Chicanos and Latinos and other people of color were all sort of things that ended up driving their careers. So I just grew up with parents who were very committed to social justice, committed to opportunity, who saw the world as a multiracial democracy that was a beautiful thing. And they really both, I think one thing I always think about is they were deeply committed to the future for Mexican Americans, but they were equally committed to like Black futurities. And, my mother, when she learned more about like what happened to Filipino communities and other Asian American communities, got deeply invested in that. My mother's family was Mexican and Jewish, so has an interesting history of that. So the questions of anti-Semitism were important to her. And then later in the life, questions around Palestine became interesting and important to them too. So they were just very simultaneously grounded in their own communities, but very inclusive and not essentialist in their thinking. They didn't have a lot of, they weren't policing thinkers in how they viewed inclusion of different communities. And I think I really took that to heart. My dad had best friends who he grew up with who didn't speak Spanish, and he didn't think of them as like less Mexican or less, decent. He was just very inclusive in that way. My mom was the same way. She had friends who were coming out at an era where people weren't coming out as often. And she thought that was like fine and lovely. And like they were just very inclusive people. So I think they just had an ethos that I grew up in that I really responded to. For my mom, more of a feminist ethos. For my dad, a kind of, but my dad was also like, gay people didn't freak him out. They were just people that sort of were of their generation, but they kind of exceeded it in ways. And I think I tried to carry that. And they both ended up getting jobs that were more social justice based in their 30s and 40s. So they got to kind of expand their opportunity structures beyond what the world imagined for them. But they would have been different people if they'd been born 10 years later. My dad would have been a lawyer. My mom would have gotten her PhD probably and been a teacher. And they never got to do those things. So I think about that too. Yeah.
Um, I believe you identify as female. Is that correct?
Yes, I
Yes.
identify with she, her. Yeah.
I just want to make sure before I,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
launch into the
absolutely.
question. If that is the case, can you talk to me some about your understanding of what it means to be a woman and the idealism or the parameters that were put on that, and then how you metabolized that and redefined it for yourself through academia and also through lived experience to
Mm,
where you are now?
yeah, that's so interesting. I mean, my parents got divorced when I was 3. So I grew up in a primarily a single mom household. My dad, typical divorced dad of the 70s and 80s. You'd visit on weekends, you'd go for holidays. It wasn't shared custody or something like that. So my mother had a really deep feminist community of, by that I mean good comadres, like good friends, good community of women. And so I think that for me, I saw what it was like for her working as a woman and struggling with the sexism that she experienced combined with racism at times or just negotiating her own multiple desires, right? To caregive at home, but also to have a career. So I think I was around her friends who were this amazing group of women, some of whom I'm still close to, some of whom sadly have passed on, but were women who modeled a lot of different, desires to be professional, desires to have rich, full personal lives. So I think that all made me just inform my life growing up. She was part of, kind of consciousness raising groups of Latinas. I think she was a member of Hijas de Cuauhtémoc, which was a Chicana feminist group that she was in for a while in the 70s, but I don't quite remember it. I remember her talking about it. Um, the other thing that was really powerful for me was going to college, is I went to college at UC Santa Cruz in the mid late 80s. And when I was there, one thing that just blew my mind is this is an era of women of color feminism that I did not know was happening. People like, This Bridge Called My Back had been published not long before. Many of those people were at Santa Cruz. Gloria Anzaldúa was at Santa Cruz. And so I came of age in the space of a lot of women of color, a lot of Chicanas and Latinas who were openly out and lesbian. So like there was kind of a presence of incredibly inspiring lesbian feminists that kind of, when I grew up, like no one was out in high school. When my students say, oh, the world hasn't really changed, it's always been so, racist or whatever, I always think like, go to high school in the late 80s. Like it was virulently homophobic. Like homophobia was just like in the air, the jokes people made, the things people said, the movies we watched. So being in that space where there were so many like amazing queer women and men, but especially women, really expanded just my sense of what women were and the power of those women and the interesting things they were saying. So yeah, that was very powerful for me to sort of it just was it just it oh what it centered for me was that you can't talk about feminism and you can't talk about Latino politics or Latinx politics without understanding queerness. Like if you don't think about those communities, you're missing so much of what makes us who we are. And that doesn't mean there wasn't homophobia and discussions and but it was just very yeah, very inspiring to be 18 and 19 and be like, "Oh my God, the world is more vast and exciting than I saw in Sacramento in the 1980s. Suddenly Santa Cruz was this very exciting queer space and
So,
non-queer space, both, right?
yes. And I
Mhm.
think part of what's important to that too, which I am coming to feel more and more, I don't know if you do, is that I think California, specifically Bay Area adjacent,
Mhm.
really was a very different place than I understood. I took it for granted that we were sort of the tip of the spear, but there was like
Mhm.
this very long spear behind us. And I
Yeah.
think looking now, I think the way that that area was at that time seems to be more anomalous than I appreciated,
Yeah.
and the sort of values and the things that went on there. And I think when it's so formative to who you are, because I grew up in Berkeley,
Hmm.
obviously back in the 80s,
Yeah.
it's interesting to look at that now and be like, oh, like that really was a very different set of values, which leads me to my next
Yeah.
question, which is threefold.
Mm.
One is, how do you understand where we are right now in America? How did whiteness take over? And can you
Mm.
I have another question about whiteness, but can you contextualize that particular word? And then thirdly, you have said Latino is not a race. I would
Mhm.
like to delve into that to further understand whiteness.
Right, right. So Latino is both, it's not a race. When you say someone's Latino, it is a racially indeterminate statement.
Yes.
And so yeah, so it's more Latinos are multiracial,
Yes.
right? Where I mean, you see me, I'd be more read as sort of mestizo, more tied to indigenous and Spanish. But I could show you pictures of my entire first cousin collective, and you'd see blondes, and you'd see, people who look, who present as, maybe Afro-Latino, right? Like the whole range. So we're a multiracial population. And that I think is important because when I think of how whiteness emerged, I think we have to think about whiteness as a historically produced identity that is also a repertoire of of commitments. And so one way to think about whiteness is it too emerges historically. There isn't what whiteness meant, you know, if you read someone like Cedric Robinson and Black Marxism, and they talk about the emergence of what he calls racialism, right? And you see the way the Irish were treated and the way they were, the politics of enclosure and land displacement, that they were seen as a less, a population that could be, dispossessed of their land, that could be dominated in particular ways. That becomes, as someone like Robinson points to, that becomes kind of the logic of certain forms of whiteness and domination that then come as people are in what becomes the new world, right? So projects of domination and projects of a certain form of white supremacy over time emerge historically, and it needs to be understood that way, and we have to think about. So, for example, in the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in the Mexican-American War, when Mexicans are incorporated into the United States through war and conquest, the treaty stipulates that they're not stipulated as like a black population,
Hmm.
right? They're stipulated as racially equal. So it's one of these things where they are simultaneously brought in as sort of racial equals, but they're socially subordinated. They're understood as a non-white population in the sense of how they're treated socially, right? Anti-Mexican rhetoric had been flourishing both before that, during the Texas Republic, and in the wars, in those earlier political and war conflicts. And then during the war, you can read American newspapers in 1846, 47, 48, and Mexicans are understood as an impure mixed race, dangerously mixed race, right? Not as pure as Indians, not as pure as indigenous populations. John C. Calhoun describes them as like not as pure as the Choctaw or the Cherokee. They're like, it's even worse. They're kind of a mixed, if racial purity is the, kind of standard, then Mexicans are even worse because they're so racially mixed. That makes them even more impure and incapable of self-rule. And because also in Spanish racial practices in the area of Mexico that Spain had dominated, that Spain had colonized, Spain had participated in forms of mestizaje that were forms of racial mixing that were involved incorporating indigenous populations. It wasn't a politics of maintaining purity. So that was also seen as another kind of bad, improper colonization, improper forms of racial rule. So Mexicans come into the United States. People like historian Laura Gomez always describes it as a form of double colonization. There's kind of layered forms of colonial practice. My colleague Josie Saldaña Portillo uses some of that language as well. These sort of forms of layered colonialisms. But whiteness as a practice in the United States starts at our inception, right? It starts with the stories of indigenous dispossession, right? When people come and start to see their encounters with new populations are seen as both kind of wondrous and amazing, but are also seen as, less equal, kind of naturally subordinate, less
Well,
rational,
exploitative as well.
exploitive people who can be seen as, when I think about Mexicans being incorporated, it was like they were what America wanted after the war was the land, not the people, right? So it has to try to incorporate as few people as possible with the hopes that those people will either kind of recede or just melt into the American population, right? So when we think about Jim Crow, when we think about enslavement, when we think about indigenous dispossession, there's stories here of racial hierarchies and practices of domination that are part of our history. They're not our only history. They're not the only part of who we are, but they're a really important part of who we are. There's also a story of at all those moments of incorporation, at all those moments when some segments of the becoming American population were viewing indigenous people a certain way, were viewing the Africans and the enslaved or people in Virginia who were seen as, who were, because at the beginning in the United States, in places like Virginia, we had people who were indentured servants. So there were people who were, who were dispossessed of their rights for periods of time, right? So you have lots of forms of inequality and hierarchy, and they're in flux. Some of them are becoming defined racially, not always racially, however. That is something that we built over time. And as we built it over time, I think it's really important to remember that those voices that won that fight in a lot of ways, that allowed that they were always countered by other voices who didn't think African enslavement was legitimate, right? You have Quaker voices, you have white people who are saying, white citizens who are saying, no, that's not the future we should have. This is unjust and immoral. You have people who were, you have people articulating an alternative vision to that, who don't think indigenous dispossession is what should happen. So that's also the becoming of America. It's not just a story that all white people showed up and all of them wanted to do one thing to all these groups of people. It's a story of a fight over what America was going to become. And there's race arguments about race and the meaning of race that are really rich and complicated and that are occurring. And then there's within Latinos, Mexican Americans in particular, there's stories there too, right? People who are enslaving indigenous populations and people who are anti-slave, who have anti-slave politics. So when we have to talk about kind of America's history of race making and the creation of white supremacy, it's a rich, complicated, long history of different choices being made over time that could have been made otherwise, and that it's not one story. There's lots of stories of how. So I think of whiteness, I always say it's a political color. It's If we think of it as a practice of domination, it's not just a story of a whole group of people doing one thing, and a whole group of people just being dominated. It's a story of agency and choice on all sides. And so that's why we have to study whiteness rather than treat it like this thing we know. We know it when we see it. We have to talk about it in its sort of depth and complexity.
So, how do you understand where we are now? Walk me up to now.
Yeah. So I think what I see now is a very long and hard history of that is a resurgence of certain kinds of. I think one of the things we have to understand about this moment, whether we call it an authoritarian moment, sometimes we call it a fascist moment, a rise of incipient fascism. There's debates, right, about who wants to use what language, if it's helpful, when it's helpful. But in the rise of what I would call a politics that is defined by a politics of domination, we are in a moment of zero-sum scarcity logics that I think, and I would characterize white supremacy and authoritarianism as, and fascism. I think what those things share. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, just to clarify, can you, in case someone doesn't know, can you
Mhm.
explain zero sum scarcity logic?
Yeah, yeah. I think in part the way I can best explain it is it's a politics that assumes that multiple communities cannot thrive at once. It's a politics that assumes that if um, if if women are thriving, that men are going to suffer. It assumes that if immigrants are gaining rights and voice, that citizenship will be devalued and denigrated. It's a logic that cannot envision multiple forms of human thriving at the same time. And then because of that, it assumes that the only way to build a better future is to dominate and eliminate populations. And I think it's that eliminationist logic that is so dangerous and so it's not the fact that the Nazis were anti-Semites or the Nazis were racist. They were those things. What is critical about them is that they tried to build a world by disappearing and eliminating Jews, gypsies, homosexuals, the disabled. It's a vision that the world cannot, that, and if they don't do that disappearing, that they themselves will be disappeared and eliminated. So that's the zero sumness. It assumes that they have to be disappeared, or we're in a world of kill or be killed, right? And that is the scarcity logics that have long, those have been in our world. We feel like it feels very new now, and there are elements that are very new or emergent that we're like, we haven't seen before in the ways they're playing out. But they're also old histories, right? They're old histories because they connect up to a world that couldn't imagine Black coexistence in this country, that couldn't imagine, that could only imagine once we had enslaved African slavery, that could only imagine a world where if this population is free, they will kill us. The nation won't exist. Our way of life will not survive because it was a way of life premised on domination, right? And so the practice of trying to render certain people rightless, to take their rights and then to see that as the only form of future existence for our people is if they are rightless. And the minute that they are given rights, we will be destroyed. That logic has a really long history in our country and in our history. It's and so that's why, when we see people losing, when we see Donald Trump and the authoritarian, MAGA elements of our politics today, characterizing liberals as unhuman, as poisoning the blood. That logic is a logic that says they can't coexist. And when you don't think you can coexist, you have to get rid of the opposition. And so one element of that is that's why we see like the desire to, they can't imagine what Aristotle defined citizenship, right? In this sort of, image of, and Aristotle had, in favor of slavery, a lot of problems there. But one interesting element of Aristotle is he defined citizenship as the practice of ruling and being ruled in turn. And so it's an idea of kind of, it's the back and forthness of power moving. Now he saw that only as moving between citizens, and that was a very narrow category for Aristotle. But the idea of ruling and being ruled in turn, the idea that we share the world, that we lose political power sometimes and we gain it back, and we build majorities and we lose and we gain and we win and we take turns. We share power. Power sharing is not a vision they can picture any longer. And I think that becomes incredibly dangerous because then they want to, I mean, I think in their ideal world, you don't have a free press. You don't have free and fair elections that they could lose. You pick your voters rather than having voters pick you. Those logics has happened to other populations in this country before. It happened to African Americans when they were rendered rightless in the wake of Reconstruction, right? There have been moments when groups of people have had their rights taken from them and they have been once again rendered rightless. That happened in the Jim Crow South, right? Following the end of the Civil War, when there was this moment of potential multiracial rights sharing and co-governance. So we've seen this before, and so that's why it has this long history. We can look into American history and see moments of this. What's new now is that they're doing it not simply by a group racially, although there's echoes of that racial politics. Certainly, we can talk about that, but it's a multiracial story of that imagines some people being rendered rightless, including lots of white people, right? They imagine if you're a liberal, then you're a communist and you're Antifa, and you need to also be rendered rightless and potentially, put into jail for the things you say if they're the wrong things. So I think that's the moment we're in, is a moment where we're back to some of the zero-sum scarcity logics, which are authoritarian. And but it's not this kind of, I think the danger for liberals a lot of times is when someone like Joe Biden would say, this is not who we are. That is the liberal disavowal of what I call Herrenvolk democracy, which was the kind of white democracy, a democracy for some and not all, right? A democracy premised on domination of some and the freedom of others. That logic that says this is not who we are is the disavowal of a history that we have to look at. It's not our only history, but it's part of our history. And I think one of the things that the right is interestingly good at is they go back to that early history of taking rights and they celebrate it. Whereas often liberals they don't know how to talk about it. And they often they talk about it by saying, like, it's not who we are. And then sometimes on the left, we talk about that early history as if that's all we were. We were just that kind of taking that is America. America is white supremacist and, we've always been authoritarian. Why are we acting like this is new? That's who we've always been. There's a totalizing story there and a kind of liberal disavowal. And so I think we need another language, and we're sort of stuck in some of these debates that are very calcified and unhelpful.
So my next question was about liberal nationalism. I'm sure you're familiar with that,
Mhm.
the
Can you
phrase.
tell me how you understand
Yes.
liberal
Oh, yeah,
nationalism?
please, of
Yeah,
course.
absolutely.
So, my understanding of liberal nationalism, feel free to correct me, it dovetails off the idea you mentioned of whether or not we all can coexist, right? And I think that there's this very unfortunate piranha pit that liberals keep falling into where it's like, no, we can all coexist, we will meet you halfway. And I
Hmm.
think and also the idea of American exceptionalism,
Hmm.
which is
Hmm.
profoundly problematic. And
Yeah.
I think looking at the Charlie Kirk thing that happened,
Yeah.
I am finding it more and more problematic to interact with the liberals who either want to virtue signal, meet the right halfway, or think that we are still this great experiment where we can all work together. Because I do think there has to be a point where, we acknowledge how deeply flawed so many parts of the country are, rather than thinking like the experiment, such as it is, predicated the way it is, and on the path that it's been on, is the only way forward. But I
Hmm.
think secondarily, the Republicans, the right, is not playing the same game the left is, right? And so there has to be a point where we look and say, this is a deeply flawed system. We cannot play it the same way they are playing it, if for no other reason than we consistently lose. But the stakes are so much higher now. And I
Yeah.
think that's where I'm looking to liberals to try and say, no, no, we're going to play a different game and we're going to play that game to win. But part of
Hmm.
that has to be this disavowal of the right's narrative, but
Hmm.
also this idea of this being this exceptional experiment that can succeed as long as we play within the confines we've always played in. And
Hmm.
so I'm curious to
Hmm.
like punt that over to you.
Yeah.
Where do you land with all of that?
Yeah. This has been like one of the central questions I've been wrestling with, right? Really trying to wrestle with. And it's sort of part of the conclusion of my forthcoming book is I'm trying to think this question through more deeply, and try to find a way to stop us from, or to offer different moves. I feel like we are trapped in a zero-sum dance that
Yeah.
feels really um, limited and unproductive in many ways, right? So like you said, I mean, I think the Charlie Kirk moment is so personifies so many of these dynamics. And um, I guess to just first off, I would definitely, I sort of, and I was at APSA when I was there the day before when it happened, and then there as it was happening and listening to people, we were all kind of trying to make sense of what was going on as it was unfolding. And and then on my way home yesterday, I was listening to Jamel Bowie, looking at I feel like Jamel Bowie right now is sort of uh, captured some of the dynamics I feel are so necessary. I feel like for those who read that, who listen to Jamel Bowie, who also won the Carrie McWilliams Journalism Award at APSA this year. But I think personifying something that I found very helpful in this regard in terms of trying to talk about this question. But I think as just one example. So I think that one of the things you see happening on the right now, right, is so Charlie Kirk, it is terrible. Political assassination is terrible. It is terrible that somebody is murdered for speaking their political views and is shot. That is horrible. That is not how we want to conduct we cannot have a future politics premised on that eliminationist logic, right? That people who are wrong are killed. That is why I did not like it. I understood the sort of affective, pleasures that some people were talking about when Luigi, blanking on his last name, but when the murder of the United Health official, that was not a favorite lefty move that people were like, because they're so frustrated by the violence of our healthcare system and the ways it harms people that they sort of took an inversive pleasure, even a playful one online. I understood it. I knew people were playing with something. It is not a form of, because it feels like to me like it's mimicking the right zero sum logic. It's dancing to their tune. And so I both got it and was like, I'm not a fan. And it's not where I think we ought to go. So I think political assassination is a bad thing. I think we all probably mostly agree with that. Political assassination, bad. Bad when it happened to Lincoln, bad when it happened to Malcolm X. It's bad. It is not how we should be solving things. What you see, and we should be able to full-throatedly say that. What is interesting to me, right, is of course what happened with the right now is that they view their political violence in the ways that I write about in Cruelty as citizenship. In that book, I talk about how white supremacy understands its violence as edifying, as freedom making, as legitimate, as civic, as a powerful participatory. That's why January 6th is not part of their story of political violence. That is why it's political violence in the sense of like the American Revolution is political violence, right? It's the kind of good nation-making violence. It's why they see their forms of elimination and violence as and when somebody shoots, when somebody bludgeons Nancy Pelosi's husband, it's just a bad egg or a mentally unstable person. But when people on the left engage in political violence, it's a left plot to destroy America and to kill everyone, including them. And that's, I think, another element of this eliminationist zero-sum logic we have to take seriously is that because that's their headspace, that the world exists in those eliminationist zero-sum ways, that it's a kill or be killed world, because they believe the world is that way.
Can I ask one question? So, just to push back a little bit,
Mm,
my personal feeling often is that the masses believe what you're talking about, but
mm,
the people in power, this is a device for control. Do
mm.
you think there's a separation in that way, or do you think that it's everyone unilaterally buys into this? Because I think fear is the most powerful thing you can do to make people capitulate.
Yeah,
But I don't think, JD Vance or whomever is sitting at home worried that we're going to take from him. But I think if you're someone who has a
yeah.
lot less, that's a real concern because the pot feels so limited already.
Right.
What
You've
would you
already
think
been
of that?
living in a world of, neoliberal scarcity logics that have been,
Yes.
creating wealth inequality and leaving people with insufficient lives in so many ways to thriving, and they're scared and they might go towards something ugly just for their own survival or their own visions. We have not we have not persuaded them that there's another vision of futurity
Yes.
for them, right? Right. But I also don't completely agree with the kind of elite elite story of full intentionality versus a mass base that is taken up by it, but not necessarily. I think there's a bit of a false, I think political elites are also complicated. I think one of the things I'm trying to make sense of is people's political desires and beliefs are really rich and complicated and paradoxical. That's true of all of us. We are enmeshed in and that the fact that we have our desires are also rich and complex and paradoxical. Sometimes we want things we wish we didn't want. Sometimes we want things we disavow. So I want to make sure that we don't place the politics of complex paradox on one side of the spectrum and say, well, so for someone like JD Vance, I think JD Vance is incredibly manipulative and tactical and strategic, and I don't exactly know what's going on in that melon, right? I don't know what's going on in that head, completely. In the same way, I remember looking at Dick Cheney, right, and thinking like, what is, and it's when they're intelligent and they don't seem just sort of visceral, the way Trump often feels like this moving piece of id politically, and is incoherent in different kinds of ways. When you see someone like Vance or Nixon or any of these people, it feels so intentional and manipulative. It's easy to think that it's all kind of a plot or it's all a consciousness that's all very intentional. Elon Musk, right? They're very smart. So, but I also think that they are full of contradictory views and I think they wake up. I think the people who are doing terrible, I think Stephen Miller thinks he's building, I think he believes in what he believes in. I think he thinks it's a better future. I think he is committed to it, not just tactically, but Steve Bannon. I think they believe what they believe in the same way that I would say Bernie Sanders believes in what he believes. I mean, I think they believe what they believe, and I think they're trying to be strategic and tactical, but I think they believe things very powerfully, and and it's not, yeah, it's not just kind of I think it'd be easier for us if we could imagine them as, I think they're simultaneously, when Bill Clinton spoke his language of American exceptionalism and neoliberal and helped, totally energize and accelerate the kind of ugly neoliberal politics we're in today with like getting rid of Glass-Steagall and the acceleration of income inequality and carceral politics that Bill Clinton as a Democrat helped inaugurate and authorize is shameful and horrifying when some people thought some of that then, but we see the fruits of all of that. And yet, I don't think Bill Clinton, and I can say many things about the awfulness of Bill Clinton and why, and that whole story. But I also think that people like him aren't just saying those things as a cover to pursue a bloody politics of neoliberal violence, to pursue a bloody politics of rapacious American global hegemony. I think they are simultaneously also believers of the world they want to create, and they think it's a better world. And they have politics I deeply disagree with, but I think they think that the world they want to build is better, and they're also, and so I mean, I think we have to fight those visions. I don't agree with them, but I don't know how useful it is for us to try to figure out if they mean it or not, or if they have any good intentions inside there or not, or if we'll never know. We'll never know what's in Bill Clinton's soul. I think a bunch of stuff is in Bill Clinton's soul. It's a hot mess in there. I think that rather, I guess I don't know if doing a kind of tracing and exposure story to decide whether or not, whether what's in there exactly and who gets that the most right is really going to get us to a better future in terms of fighting for the future we want to build and trying to create a large coalitional popular front of people that want to share the world we want to share. And we're going to have fights with them. We're going to have ongoing political fights between leftists and liberals, progressives and neocon. We're going to have these fights are ongoing. But I think we have to figure out like what our vision of thriving might look like. And then we're going to have to figure out when and if and how we are in coalition with democratic liberals who believe in a different form of patriotism. We're going to fight over what belonging and membership looks like and what it ought to look like. And this is one reason I'm calling for something I call affective abundance, which is I'm calling for a politics where we can admit that we feel multiple things about many things, because I don't think we do well, for example, on the national kind of liberal nationalist language. I don't think we are going to do very well having a fight over whether or not, we if we're going to fight over the fact that some people do think America is, I think America is beautiful and terrible and heartbreaking and amazing and a space I want to build better futures in. And I am moved by this place and I love this place. And I have to be able to, as a progressive or a leftist, acknowledge that I am outraged and appalled so much about this country, but I also love this place really deeply. And if I only talk about my outrage and my horror, then I am disavowing the fact that I am deeply invested and committed to this place. I don't find the language of patriotism my language, but I also am not going to police people over theirs. We can talk and we can have fights about it because it's like, well, how does that language fold into jingoism and settler colonial fantasies of exceptionalism? And I don't agree with that. But I also understand that when people will use the language of patriotism, most people mean a lot of different things in it. And and I think in all the different things they mean when they invoke patriotism, we have overlap with each other. And I'm not going to spend all my time fighting about the word. I think America has shown moments of its exceptional. I don't like the language of exceptionalism for all the reasons a lot of us don't like it. But I also think that there have been moments when people in this place and space, in this nation state, not only this nation state, we're one of many. If I was born somewhere else, I'd have those attachments, right? But people do care about the places they were born and raised. And we have to take that attachment seriously. We might want to push on it and expand it or think about all the ways it's not zero sum. But I don't want to pretend I have, students who are incredibly critical of settler colonial projects and they love Texas because that's where they're from. And they love the neighborhoods and people and symbols that they grew up with and they have affective attachments to. And they also would like to see Texas be a radically different place. And they love Texas, right? We have to be able to hold all of that together. And I think sometimes, we have been on the side of kind of the logics of reckoning and confronting and wanting to argue with what they're saying. And they're saying America's beautiful and perfect and love it or leave it. And you end up in these really unhelpful debates, I think, because we love it and we hate it. And so do a lot of people. So do they. I mean, God, they say all kinds of things about the United States that are kind of appalling. So I think we need to get out of this logic. And one example I'll give is I only read it very quickly, but the fact that people lost their minds over Ezra Klein's op-ed about Charlie Kirk, that they got so that all of a sudden Ezra Klein was like the worst person alive. And it was like, there's a lot of things I like about Ezra Klein. I agree with a lot of things he says. Sometimes I don't agree with them. Sometimes I get frustrated and I dislike what he says. If Ezra Klein is not part of our anti-authoritarian popular front, we are going to lose. Like, there were things he said. I understand the logic of why he said them. I think he was ignoring Kirk's own eliminationist fantasies that we have to take really seriously and not get caught up in this hagiography that Bowie was talking about. And I think a little of his thing goes down that path, and that's not great. I will argue with that. But he's not my enemy. I don't need to like crap all over him and just have this like he's a fetid monster. Like the overreaction speaks to a certain kind of left practice, or I think it's just a left online practice in particular,
Sure.
that we feel so angry and helpless and scared ourselves that you take somebody you agree with, I don't know, maybe 70%, and you just lose your mind over the 30. It's not a great way to, I mean, I think we should talk about what we don't like about it. But people should absolutely get online and say, here's the 8 things I didn't like about that. Yeah, let's have that conversation. What struck me about it was the vitriol and the kind of effusive hatred that I saw among some that just felt so out of whack. Yeah, it felt like an out of whack affective response to me. They have a right to say it. I'm not telling people not to feel their feelings and go online and do that. You do you, man. I'm just saying that if he's that much on the other side, then we're going to have a very tiny. We're not going to have majorities that can win the future.
Can I push back on that a little bit?
Absolutely, we can have that fight. I'm totally into it. Totally.
So my pushback on that would be, and I'm curious what you would say, is, when one reads that piece, I think the problematic parts are so deeply problematic, meaning to sanitize what he said as free speech. I mean, it's free speech in the definition of free speech, right? But it's also hate speech, which is
Hmm.
protected, but it is hate speech.
Yeah.
And to in any way covet what he has. I
Mm-hmm.
think that is a part that is, at least for me, when I look at
Hmm.
where I wish the left would go, I don't want to define where we need to go by anything that is going on the other side in that way.
Yeah.
I'd much rather it was, sure, he was an effective speaker, but the effectiveness of the message is so problematic towards any kind of future for this country
Hmm.
that, like, that part is difficult. And I think when you legitimize, even through saying that it's a valid point of view, or he that you want any piece of what he had, at least to me, that's where I felt like there was a really
Right.
difficult rub. And I
Right.
think if it was just to say he's a person, he's allowed to express his opinion, I understand and respect that. But I
Hmm.
think the left constantly reacting to and being defined by a party that I feel has none of the left's interest in mind, but
Yeah.
moreover, the sort of savagery and the torture that we have exerted in the last
Hmm.
9 months on the most vulnerable population, I find that part really
Yeah.
difficult to reconcile with
Yeah.
any left person saying, well, there's value in it. And I'm not
Hmm.
saying you throw them all out the window, but I am saying if you're finding value, it has to be so meticulous and so specific. And it
Right.
also has to take into account, the destruction of lives and the harm that's been done. And so
Right.
that's where I would push back and say, like, then how do you navigate that?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think one of the points there that I think what's really important, I disagree completely with the sanitizing that goes on in that piece. That I
Sure.
don't, that I think I think he was wrong. I think in an effort to acknowledge that I mean, and I think this is also the temporality of online culture is, is part of what I call a kind of, well, this is a different story, but I think there's a kind of, a politics of emotional withholding that happens very quickly after I mean, like the guy's body's base. I mean, it's like a couple days. So, one question is, I often think like maybe everybody shouldn't have a hot take that second. Like maybe take a few days before you write anything. And that would go not just for Klein, but for all of us, right? Like, calm down. You don't have to have a hot take on this, right? I'm not on Blue Sky or Twitter. I'm not on it because I think it's corrosive to my thinking. I think it's corrosive to kind of a lot of, I don't, my husband loves it and he tells me what's going on and that's great. But I just don't, I'm not saying not to do it. For me, I find I don't think it helps my emotional well-being in this authoritarian moment. But I do think that kind of immediacy, I think in trying to respond to the immediacy and trying to be attentive to the fact that like a person died in a very public video that was pretty horrifying, that the sanitizing moment was bad. I disagreed with it. I think it's wrong. Charlie Kirk was a promoter of eliminationist hate speech. It's not a kind of speech we want to replicate or have some inversive. We don't want to have some version of our own of that, right? I don't want somebody going around to campuses and calling for the elimination of evangelicals or calling for right the erasure of that we should like jail trad wives or whatever. I don't want somebody I don't want a vision of the world that's like an upside down of their fantasy that people who want to live in the world, unlike me, right? That women, people who homeschool their kids ought to be jailed, right? I don't want to live in that world either. I want to live in a world where I accept the fact that there are many forms of human thriving that I am not going to agree with. Lauren Berlant described it as the inconvenience of other people, which can sometimes feel unbearable, right? It can be unbearable, but it is also the condition of sharing the world that we live in. I live in a world where people are going to want to live in the world in ways I do not. And they are going to be here until I die and after. As long as there are people, there is going to be deep fundamental disagreements between us, and we are going to have to find a way to co-inhabit the world in that, right? We have to share the world with other people, and those people are going to say things that we find really terrible. So I want to fight against hate speech. I want to oppose it any chance I can. I want to stand against it. I want to offer an alternative to it. But I also don't fantasize that I'm ever going to live in a world in which hate speech ceases to exist. It is going to be part of the ongoingness of the world. I mean, think about think about Germany right now. This is a country that did some incredibly important reckoning, right? And like, yes, we could, I don't want to go into the whole discussion we can have about their struggles to deal with the struggles with Israel and Palestine and the way that fight is happening there that would be a whole episode. But that is something they're wrestling with right now that's not great. But this is a country that did denazification. This is a country that does not have monuments to Hitler, right? It has monuments to the murdered Jews. It's a country that has stumblestones and did incredibly deep work of reckoning, right? And they are potentially now one election away from the ADF winning, from a neo-Nazi party winning. I think the point of that is simply that we can do and we should do the really important work of reckoning and fighting and trying to build something better. But we also cannot fantasize even in our dreams that we're going to ever live in a world where that stuff's not going to keep. It's an ongoing struggle against the logics of elimination. It is a part of the world we live in. That it is something that is it is a part of life that I would love to see not be a part of the world. But I also, given the state of human history, am not going to bet that it will someday not be a part of the world. That hatefulness and hate. Now how we adjudicate how to deal with hate, how we decide how to deal with the speech that is hateful, how we decide to confront it and produce political responses to it, that is an argument we will have, and we will have to come up with ways of managing it, right? Currently, we live in a world where free speech includes hate speech. It's hateful, and it should be roundly condemned and spoken against, which is our right as people who are opposed to hate speech, right? It's our right to say that is horrible. It is our right to counter-protest their protest. And it's their right to counter-protest our protest, right? We live in a world where we're allowed to stand up together and be like, you are unbearable. I hate everything you stand for, right? I think you are wrong about everything, and they are right to do the same. What I think the line for me is always is you cannot build a world with your boot on my neck. You cannot build a future. You can talk about how you want to build a world with your boot on my neck. You cannot, I will forever fight and fight as part of an anti-fascist coalition against your right to build a world based on domination and elimination of me and the people I care about and love and support, and all the marginalized and non-marginalized communities that I am connected to and invested in, right? I'm not going to let you build that future. I'm going to fight it for the rest of my life, right? But I think so I totally get that. But I think that Klein's point about, and you may not agree with what I just said, but what Klein's point is, I think that's when, and you said we should not covet what Kirk had. Well, I think what Klein was saying was he does covet something Kirk had, which is Kirk's capacity as an organizer, that Kirk was going into all these spaces on college campuses and creating these spectacles. And they're not really spectacles of free speech and deliberation. If I wanted to build a spectacle on a college campus, it would have to enact a non-eliminationist story of mutual thriving. It would have to be, but it was a spectacle that students came to see and that they enjoy, that a lot of them took pleasure in and found exciting and interesting and worth watching. And it recruited people into this right-wing assemblage. It recruited people into this right-wing world. And so I think what I took from it, and again, I skimmed this before running off to a dinner party, so I have not gone back to it. But what I took from that was he covets the capacity to draw people in, to win over people who don't already agree, to create spectacles that were pleasurable for young people to see themselves in and to go to, and that he won people over to his views, and that we need to be going into every kind of space, red spaces, blue spaces, progressive, conservative, evangelical, and we need to be saying our world is more beautiful than the world they're telling you about. Our world is better. And that's what Kirk was saying. He was saying our world is better. I think his world is ugly and small, but he was trying to make a case that his world was better. And I think Klein's point was that no, our world is better and we should be out there fighting for that and making a case for that. And so, in that sense, I covet any time any political movement makes people feel seen and empowered and engaged. I want to do that. Now, I don't think I have to do it the way he did it. Like, I think that's the difference. Liberals often mimic the right. They try to do some watered down version. So like we'll just be kind of anti-trans. We'll just be a little, we'll just throw this group under the bus. We'll say super predators and we'll show we're hard on crime. Like all the ways that when liberals mimic the right, it's always a terrible strategy because we can never be as good at elimination as they are. We have to be non-elimination. So we have to be something else. But we have to also do what they're doing right now, which my colleague Dan Hosang and Joe Lowndes have been writing about when they write about the multiracial right. Those people give people a sense of place and pleasure and a sense of belonging and futurity. They make people feel welcome in their movements sometimes. And that's one reason why they're growing. I think we have to figure out a way to look at some of the things that they do successfully in the same way that the left, I mean, the right, after the 1960s, the right looked at how successful the counterculture was. And they were like, you know what? They won because they offered sex, drugs, and rock and roll. They offered a very pleasurable vision of a future. And we looked like these moralists. We did not offer very much. And so the right has always tried to mimic forms of the left. It has always found certain acts of unruliness appealing. So I think being able to be an organizer that looks tactically at what the right is doing, not in terms of what they're trying to create, not the content, but there are practices that different movements can do. And those practices are, they're giving people pleasure. I don't want to give it on the same terms, but I too want to build a movement that is welcoming and that is fun for people. I want that. I don't want it on the premise of their logics at all. Liberals often, I think, try to take some of the premise, the content. I don't want the content. But I don't think Klein was calling for the content. I think he was calling for the strategies. But I think in an effort to sanitize, in an effort to acknowledge that something horrific had happened, it came off as a kind of sanitizing logic. That's how I take it. As I skimmed it. I'm not here to like, he can fight that fight himself. That's not my problem. That's not my fight. But I do think that, but the vitriol felt excessive. And I think it sometimes feels like when we feel out of control, when we feel like the world right now is so ugly and violent and authoritarian and just murderous, like literally murderous, that when somebody who you think of as an ally says something that disappoints you or hurts you or makes you feel invisible or unseen or whatever, when we see our allies speak in ways that upset us, I think we just turn on them with a level of horror because we're all in so much pain right now that hating on them is like one of the few things we can do together because we can't undo all the violence, but I can shit all over Ezra Klein or I can shit all over the New York Times. And I mean, I think, hey, if people want to and it makes them feel better, they ought to. I just think that after we do that, or in addition to doing that, we got to do a lot of other stuff too.
I agree with you. I think the thing though is which the left never does well is holding a line. And I think for a lot of people it felt like he didn't hold the line because
What do
he
you mean by
just
hold the line?
that certain things are so transgressive and unacceptable that even if someone does a piece of something well, but the other things they do are so violative and
Mhm.
terrible, he just as easily could not have written the piece. Do you know what I
Right.
mean?
But what did he do that didn't hold the line? Was it simply not deeply enough acknowledging and sitting with the hate and the eliminationist? That
Yes,
wasn't
I think
holding the
so.
line?
I think
That
so,
was
really, because there was a piece in The Nation where, the writer, I can't remember her name, but what
mm,
she did is say, I'm not celebrating his death. And then she listed so many of the truths of what he had said
right,
and said, but I'm also not mourning it. And I felt like that was a very fair piece where it's like, of course, this man shouldn't have been killed. And of
right.
course, there was a power to what he had. But at the same time,
Yeah.
there's absolute unacceptable pieces of what went on. And I thought that was much more measured. And I think
Oh,
that that was fair. But I
yeah.
think, to go back to what you were saying earlier, though, I do think you talk a lot about pleasure. And
Hmm.
I wonder, though, if the pleasure that is being taken now is deeply rooted in feeling superior to other human beings based on what you were born as, what your race is, what your whatever. If that is part of the pleasure, how can that be removed or taken apart or reappropriated to something else? And do you think that's part of it?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think to this point about holding the line, I
Yeah,
think I both I both totally appreciate that, and I wish everybody did. I wish every, but I think in a way is there's kind of a feeling of like, um, you know, I wish everybody felt the way I felt about everything.
sure.
The world would be awesome, I think, because I don't know if any of your listeners, it's an old Joss Whedon, who I know is his own person, but had a video during the writer's strike called Dr. Horrible. And Neil Patrick Harris played Dr. Horrible, who had a PhD in horribleness. And at one point in the skit, the character says, "The world is a mess, and I just need to rule it." And I think we all feel that way. The world is a
Yeah,
mess and I just need to rule it. And the fact of the matter is, though, is that we don't, right? That like, so I wish every op-ed that came out was the op-ed that I agreed with 100%. But the fact of the matter is, Ezra Klein did not hold the line. He did not, but he's in my coalition nonetheless. And I think that we have to get used to fighting about that. I think if I think that logic of like holding the line, I think if we stay in that logic, I think that is the logic that makes it very hard to build coalitions of people who kind of agree, who all deeply agree that Trump is and that Trumpism and the far right and conservative eliminationist politics is something that our democracy, if we're going to have one, has to be protected and fought for in this moment. If we're going to base it on that kind of holding the line, I think we're going to have a very small group of people behind us, and they're going to have a much bigger one. So I just don't think it's going to work that way. I think we can of course like the better articles and better arguments, and we should fight for that vision. But if somebody doesn't exactly cohere to our view of and that we might say that has really bad implications, what you said has real, and here's why I think they're wrong. All right, but I still think we're just going to have to we're going to I think it by holding the line we also make our coalition much smaller. Because if somebody read that piece, let's say you're some random person who's a liberal right now, and you read that piece and you thought, hey, he makes a bunch of good points. And then you went on Blue Sky and you saw everybody saying this guy is a nightmare, he's a monster, crap, crap, crap. And you're like, I liked it. So they must think I'm also an asshole, right? They must think I'm a total jerk. What we're doing if we do that, like, and I'm not saying people should say what they want to say. I'm not
I
here to
understand.
tell them
I
they're
just,
not going to say it. They should. I'm just saying that as organizers, as people trying to win over majorities, I think it might make better sense to have coffee or drinks with your friends and talk about all the shit you want to talk about. And maybe don't, because, and maybe decide or not decide to post that online. I don't know. Do what you want to do. But I just think there are a lot of liberals who read that op-ed and thought he made a bunch of great points. And then what they saw online is a bunch of progressives saying that that guy is a monster. And then I think we should really think seriously about what does that do? Well, it makes people who agree with him think that left people think they're terrible. And if we build a movement where more and more people make that they think we think they're terrible, how are we going to win? How are we going to win if more people? I mean, that's at the fundamental level, I want to win. I want to make
I understand.
authoritarian politics smaller and weaker, and I want to reveal it in all its sadness and misery and ugliness. And I want our world to look bigger and more beautiful and more exciting and more pleasurable. And I don't see how we're going to do that if we make people feel like, oh, a good, clearly committed progressive said some things. And now he is an enemy of the people, of the left.
Mhm.
And then we say we really have to do something about our purity politics. We just literally did it. We just literally did the thing. So I think when it comes to pleasure, which is what your question was about, when it comes to pleasure, um, look, politically, anybody who's political takes pleasure in the fall of their enemies. I mean, there's a little bit of that in all of us. It's like Conan the Barbarian, it's like that guy, we had the cry of their women. I mean, there's a quality of people who, there's something very human in taking pleasure in seeing in people you disagree with losing. Feels good when they lose. It's not a pretty side of us, but it's a part of us.
Mhm.
So I think we should, push against it in ourselves. I don't think the fact that they love liberal tears means we should love right-wing tears. But I mean, I think we have to acknowledge that pleasure is a really capacious set of affects, and that they are going to include things that are not pretty about us, and they're going to include really beautiful things about us. And that's all going to be in there. And we're going to have to try to cultivate, I think we have to cultivate a sense of pleasure that is more abundant and more capable of the really beautiful things. But we revel in our melancholy. Sometimes we revel in our self-righteousness. We revel in our anger. Our anger gives us pleasure too. I mean, when people were shitting on Ezra Klein, that felt good, right? That's a kind of pleasure, right? And when they shit on us, it feels good. So any politics we build that is articulating a full sense of how we feel is going to take pleasure in our enemies losing. I'm not saying that's not going to be a part of our politics. I think it is. It's not the most beautiful part of our politics, but it's a part of us. There are better parts of us too, and I want to kind of hail in those things. But I think one thing that liberals often do is liberals try to perform like only the good affects,
Sure.
you know, that like I just, and it seems really dishonest, right? When someone like Kamala Harris is saying, or, this country's the greatest country in the world, and I love it, and I love this country, and I am so proud to be an American, and blah blah blah. I believe on the one hand, those are all true things. And I could say those things, that I love this country and that I love so many things about this place and the people in it. And I'm full of love too. And that I think there's amazing things that this country has done. And I can talk about those. But I also feel like shame and anger and outrage about this country too. And I want to be able to talk about all of it. And that's what I mean by effective abundance. I think what a left, progressive, anti-fascist language of what the future should be that we can say this country is amazing. This country is horrible. This place is beautiful, and people make futures here. And it has involved, it has also been built on stolen land and stolen labor. And I want to be able to talk about all of it. And one of the things the right can't do is, the right sounds very abundant, but the right is always like, you can only say this country is beautiful. You can only say shitty things about the left, and you can only say beautiful things about the right. They are so policing in the story of America that they think that's why they're literally removing history from curriculum, from monuments. They understand celebrating America as telling lies about America, only telling one part of the story. I think our response can't be like, well, look, this country's done a lot of shitty things. Because then what? We're the party of the shitty things? We're the people who only talk about slavery and dispossession? Why aren't we talking about Black freedom struggles and Black joy and trans futurities and the fact that there can be beautiful forms of heterosexuality and queerness, that I want men to thrive, and men can be firefighters and mixed martial art people and football players and stay-at-home dads and queer and trans men living beautiful lives along with straight evangelical men. I want people to live beautiful, thriving lives across the board in ways that I may not agree with. And I want them to allow me to live my thriving life, right? That I think is going to be a much better answer to a future politics than holding the line, than telling people, it's not exactly the world we want to live in. I mean, I think it's this. So when you say that, it seems like you're kind of on the other side of this. I get the impulse. I feel it too. And I think we should still have fights about like, here's what I didn't like what you said. But I think underneath that has to be like, yeah, but I think, you want a lot of people to thrive. I want a lot of people to thrive. Come on in. We're going to be in a big, messy, hot, messy coalition. I like messy. I like people who are a hot mess. A lot of my friends, I can be a hot mess. I'm a big fan of a hot mess. I think we need to be a democracy that's a hot mess in a beautiful, joyful, ugly, incredibly strange, weird way that is the United States. We are a big, hot mess. And we should be the people who say, it's a big, beautiful, alarming, depressing, exciting hot mess. And we just want to build something better out of it. Not worse, but better. But you know what? If you also think we're a big, beautiful, ugly, hot mess, come on in. We're the people who want to laugh and play and build with you. And those people want to tell you that there's one way to be a man, one way to be a woman, one way to like be religious, one way to be, they're telling you that all their hate speech is freedom, but they're actually telling you that your way of living has to be really small. And that is sad. And our world is not sad. You're a cis white straight man? Awesome. Who isn't? Bunch of people are. Come on in. We just need to find a new language to stop dancing to their scarcity politics. That's what I think. Might tell me that is, I don't know, something else. But that is not the language of liberal compromise. That is not the language of like, we just have to accept a half a loaf and we have to, I don't think we have to come up with a language that isn't this sort of everyone has a point and compromise. And, I think, of course, there's compromise, but we have to fight aggressively for a future we want, and we have to win majorities. So I'll stop there.
No,
My
but to your
long
point
rant.
then, that to me though is a different mechanism of holding the line
Mm,
because that's what I'm saying about compromise. Like that
yeah,
when I say hold the line, I
right.
speaking to that to me it's this broader idea of inexhaustible compromise. And that
Hmm.
is the thing I think we have to stop
I
because
agree.
we keep going from the center
To them more and more.
right
Yeah.
to meet them. And
Hmm.
that's to clarify, that's what
Yeah.
I mean. And
Yeah.
that's where I feel like we run into so much trouble.
Yeah, that's a great point because I think that I was thinking about the idea that because Ezra Klein's not creating or promoting legislation, so there's no holding the line there in the sense
Sure.
that like he's not there's not the Ezra Klein bill for something. I mean, there's not a bill for
Sure.
that, right? That's just a person, another opinion person putting forward a political vision that you think is partly right and partly wrong, and telling him why you think it's wrong in this way, which is what we should be doing. It may be in ways that don't just completely try to decimate people. But yeah, I think that so holding the line in terms of yeah, I think Democrats have looked so weak and feckless
Yes.
and that we're not going to win a majority by being like I said, like being a little anti-trans or a little. But I do think we can look, I mean, I think I don't want Ezra Klein to become in any way the star of this show.
Yes.
But his interview with Sarah McBride was so interesting because and people might be like, oh, Sarah McBride's an elected official, too bound up in compromise or too whatever, problematic in different ways. But what I found really interesting and I really liked about McBride's was thinking like an organizer who wants to win a better life for trans people and everybody, but who also recognizes that we might need to reorient our politics in a way that we have to win people over and we've got to explain people and we have to not just police people's speech when people are unsure or uncertain about new forms of gender that are not new. We've always had non-binary and trans people as part of world history. It's part of who we are as human beings. And yet, lots of people don't know that. Lots of people have never had to use these new pronouns. And we need to be sensitive to people asking awkward and weird questions, getting it wrong, being worried about their kids competing in sports. We have to like talk to them and reassure. We have to not be afraid or it's not compromise or capitulation to reassure people
Of
or to
course.
explain things to people or to make them feel safe or to acknowledge their anxieties. There is not, you know what that all is? That's organizing. That's
Yeah.
being a political organizer who wins over people to your vision of the world. And it's by meeting people like all good organizers do in unions and everything. You meet people where they are and you try to get them over to your side by listening and reassuring them. So you can't just get mad at people because when you're trying to organize for trans futures, that's going to mean winning over people who are going to say transphobic things. And you're going to have to listen to them and say, you know, you got that wrong. And what I oppose is, and that we might actually have to extend a certain amount of, of grace or patience with non-trans politicians who will say things that come across as transphobic and try to engage them with like, here's why what you said is messed up and why we need to make sure that we protect these communities and we don't cause increased harm. And so you said that wrong because you probably only recently started thinking about this too. And you're a Democrat though. And because that's how McBride has had to meet up with those people is she said, look, I don't want them to vote on anti-trans legislation. And she has to go talk to them. And on Blue Sky or whatever, people are like, that person's a monster. And McBride is there talking to them saying, I don't know if you knew what that sounds like for us, or I don't know if you understand, but I want you to vote for this better legislation to protect communities. So I want to make sure the legislation is not violent or bad or capitulating. And we want to pass better laws. But I want to pass better laws with majorities. And that means I may have to pass better laws with majorities. And sometimes the majority I'm trying to pass those better laws with is going to say some dumb shit because they're 82 years old because we have a friggin' gerontocracy in our politics and they don't know how to talk about it. And they talk about it badly. And they think that maybe talking about it badly is going to be like strategically not a problem anymore or something. So it's the simultaneity of struggling with people and reassuring and meeting with people. And I think it's an organizing skill that is very supple and hard that we're going to have to engage in. But I absolutely 100% agree with you that any liberal effort to build futures that don't protect marginal communities. But I do think that thinking about how we're gonna have fights about that too, because we're gonna have fights about, people who have maybe different views of sovereignty, different views of borders, the legitimacy or illegitimacy of borders. Left and liberals and progressives, we're going to have fights about what the boundaries of the nation state, how we adjudicate those, what constitute legitimate and illegitimate. We're going to have arguments about that. And those are going to be hard and interesting, and we're going to have to fight about those because I think we all want migrants to thrive. But I bet we will all agree on that as our popular front. But when we get into the details of which migrants are going to get green cards or which people are going to be let in or what is a refugee, what constitutes the status, we're going to get into the weeds and we're going to have disagreements. And that's where we're going to start to see real fights. And those are inevitable to any coalition. Yeah.
What I think one point though that you're talking about, which is important to parse out too, though, is intent, right?
Mm,
Like intent does matter. And I think that that has also been very much lost in the conversation and
mm,
giving someone
yeah.
the benefit of the doubt. I mean, unless it's like very clear what the intent was. And
Yeah, I
I
don't need
think,
to, I don't need to give Stephen Miller the benefit of the
no,
doubt. I know
yeah, no,
exactly where he's coming from. We know that.
no.
He might believe in his world, but yeah, that's that.
But I think that's where Me Too honestly messed up an enormous amount as well,
Mm,
as I think there was work there where it could have been, let's talk about what we can do, not with everyone that did things
mm,
wrong, but some people who did things that were not great, and say, like, okay, where is this an opportunity for learning or for forgiveness or for change rather
mhm.
than sort of unilateral disregard? And I think that's something where I wish we had handled some of that differently.
Yeah, yeah. And some of that is like what happens when I mean we have to both engage in really useful self-criticism, but then also be kind to each other about this stuff too, that
Sure.
we were doing those things because we were trying to create a world where like women weren't being harmed as much and that our harm wasn't just normalized.
Yeah.
And then it turned into something sometimes that could become a kind of circular firing squad or a kind of ungenerous inversion that didn't make a lot of room for mistakes or errors or learning to live together in new
Yeah.
ways. So, but it also came from a place of what happens when people have been through a lot of harm and they
I am.
and it also like we have to admit to the fact that when people who have been experiencing marginalization and
Yes.
and silencing, that when we experience that, it can feel good sometimes initially
Sure.
to marginalize and harm, right? It
Yep.
feels good to make somebody else sit down and shut up and listen. But to remember that, like, oh, when I do that, when I engage in that politics, I'm just doing misogyny and white supremacy's dance. It feels good because that's the dance I learned. That's the dance that was taught to me. And if I really want to build a better future, and I'm looking at this guy who screwed up and did something wrong. I'm not talking about people who are just like raping people but just people who screw up and participate in rape culture and in video game culture or whatever, people who screw up. If I want to build a non-misogynist feminist future,
Yeah.
I have to behave in ways that are feminist and non-misogynist. And that means I've got to treat this person with care and decency and kindness because that's
Yes.
the world I'm trying to build. And that's hard, right? That's so hard because um, you don't even get the satisfaction. I don't even get to wield it ever. Seriously, that's kind of a bummer. But I think that it's how we build something different. But it does mean that we have to orient ourselves differently, and we need, you know, new infrastructures of feeling or new practices of feeling, new
Right.
ways of doing it, and that aren't like letting him get off the hook. I think we have
Of
to really
course.
understand when we exhibit grace and generosity that that is a radical political act. That is a form of political radicalism to refuse to participate in white supremacy, to refuse to participate in settler supremacist logics, to refuse to do inversion is to say fuck you to those politics.
Sure.
Every time I am decent to other human beings who aren't the same as me is a fuck you to JD Vance and Stephen Miller. Every time I'm decent to people who aren't like me, I'm building a world that they hate. It's like when you walk around Berlin sometimes and you see like a queer German Turkish couple, eating doner kebab on the sidewalk, and you're like, wow, that is everything Hitler hated. That is you see couples, you see a man and a woman walking together under conditions of love and equality and decency, and you're like, yeah, this is not the world they wanted. And that's beautiful. That is beautiful in its enactments every day. That's an anti-supremacist future, I think, right?
Right. Well, so one quote from Cornell West. You
Yeah.
can't lead the people if you don't love the people. You can't save the people if you don't serve the people. And I think my
Mm-hmm.
question to you would be, with everything you've just said, do you feel the majority of those in power on either side are doing that?
I think we have so many entrenched leaders who need to get out of the way and be primaried. And that doesn't mean that I don't want to fight with them and work with them and recognize the combined. I feel a lot of things for these people, right? The service they've given, the commitments they had, the political failures they have inaugurated and sustained. All of that is true about a lot of these people. I can simultaneously honor some of the work they've done and be like, you need to go away now. You are done. Thank you for your service. We need some new voices and new people because we cannot continue to be ruled under a gerontocracy. We need fresh and new voices. And that is not to deny the good work they've done. It's to acknowledge, it would have to be we'd have to have a very specific conversation about this or that elected official. So I don't think I can make a blanket claim of, I think some of them tried to serve and have failed. Some have served and done and served with honor and then also failed us. Most of them, anybody who's in an elective office for 40 years, I will see a list of things that I go, wow, you should be really proud of that. And wow, you absolutely are part of the problem that has led us to where we are right now. Right? So I think that's an awesome slogan, but I think the reality is we need a lot of new leaders. We need real fights in the Democratic Party. I mean, they need them on the Republican Party, but that's not my problem. But we need to have real fights about what we stand for, and we need to do it in a way. We need to have those fights, right? And we need new people. That's one reason why Mamdani is so exciting. Is it's an offer of somebody who I think is, yeah. There's so much I could say about him, but I think just it's exciting to see somebody who is rendering a future politics that is joyful and progressive and is inviting people in, even people who voted for Trump in 2024. He's like, come on into this future. You think things are broken? So do I. But here's why I think they're broken. And people are like, okay, like that kind of movement is what we need. But I also think that people who I deeply disagree with would say if you ask them if they love the people. And again, I don't know what's in their hearts. So I don't find it very helpful to be like, they don't really love the people. I don't know. I think I don't know what they love. I know what I love, and I can only speak to that. And I can only speak to, I can argue with the things they did that I think did not show care or commitment to the kind of better futures I want. But I also think that you can never just judge people on their one vote. I am so angry at Joe Biden right now, I could spit. I We could spend our whole time talking about that. But I would be wrong to not acknowledge that that was a man who at some points really wanted to do good things in the world and had good things in his heart and is also an arrogant, egotistical person who refused to, I mean, just failed America in an extraordinary way. And he has to go to his grave knowing that he failed this country with his ego. right? And the people who sustained him have to live with the fact that they helped bring us here, right? They have to live with that. And I will happily talk about the failures there, right? But also I can also hold in my heart and hold in my head that that was a man who really did also want to serve, and it's sort of tragic and sad. And that also doesn't make him not responsible for the choices he made, right? So I can look at a lot of people in the Democratic Party and see a lot of different things in them, and also really wish that we need to legitimately primary people out, and maybe we do it in a spirit of thank you for your service. You're not just a failure, but you've also done. We don't even need to talk about them a lot of the time. Just need to be like, here's where we want to go. I think so much of our politics gets caught up in telling other people you're doing it wrong. Like we
Sure.
start there, you're doing it wrong. And then we decide, we tell them all the ways they're doing it wrong. Then we say we should do this. In some ways, I'm kind of calling for a politics that says, why don't we start with let's do this and spend a little less time telling each other that we're doing it wrong? Because if we're trying to persuade people, you want to paint a picture of the world that people look at and go, that looks better than this, right? But if I initially start by saying you're doing it wrong, then you're not even going to listen to the next thing I say to you.
Do
So,
you really,
I,
oh, do
oh
you
yeah,
really think it's that simple? Sorry, that if people saw a better vision, they would just change? They would say, "Oh, I like that. Let's do that instead."
I think not always. No, it's hard
Sure.
work to persuade people. I think it is hard work to persuade. But I do think that if I'm interested in the politics of persuasion, one of the things that doesn't help that is if I start by describing all the ways you have previously failed me
Sure.
and you have
Sure.
done violence and you have done a bad job. And then I say, here's the world I want to build, right? Because you've now hailed people into
Sure. Sure.
recognizing themselves as all the bad things.
Sure.
So I think that strategically, organizationally, rhetorically, affectively, there are better and worse ways of organizing people. That's all. And I think one good way of organizing people is to say, this is a weird analogy, and I don't want it to sound like I'm talking about people as if they're children, but it reminds me of when I don't have kids, so I also have like no authority to say anything. But I have friends with toddlers, and I'm an aunt, and I have lots of friends with like really lovely, beautiful kids who are also occasionally annoying and irritating because they're people. So, but when they're really invested in something, and they're like, I want ice cream. And if you spend all your time trying to reason with them about why they can't have ice cream, and the reason we're gonna have dinner in 2 hours, and honey, I know you want ice cream, but we'll have ice cream tomorrow, and they're like losing their shit over the fact they're not getting ice cream. A better way often is like, let's go on the swings, and they're like swings, and then you're not fighting about ice cream anymore. You're on the swings, and the swings are awesome. And then a couple hours go by, and then you go have dinner, right? Like, so I actually do think as organizers, instead of getting in the weeds about all the ways we don't agree about everything, I
Sure.
do think that as an organizer, a much better way of organizing is to say, let's do this. How does this look to you? Does this look fun? Does this look appealing? Does this look like a world you want to live in? What does this picture of masculinity look like? What is this picture? We don't always have to like first premise everything with the litany of things
Sure.
we don't agree with. I think we've kind of gotten into that self-reflexive habit.
Right.
It's a kind of left and progressive way of beginning something. And
Sure.
not just that. Liberals love to start by being like, here's all the ways the left have failed.
Sure.
And then they try to say something, and it's like, well, now I'm not going to listen to you because you just insulted me for the first four paragraphs
Fair enough.
of your op-ed, and now you're saying they should do this. Why should I listen to you? You treated me like crap there. So it's a critical form. It's academic. Academics spend a lot of time telling other scholars what they did wrong.
Yeah.
It's a critical move. I think there might be other forms of logic. I take some inspiration from thinking about Eve Kosofsky Sedgwick and the way she describes paranoid versus reparative readings, and she kind of describes the what she calls in theory jargon the hermeneutics of suspicion, and maybe finding other. It's not that those aren't useful. She's not against paranoid reading. She's not against the hermeneutics of suspicion. Do a lot of important work. But when you treat the hermeneutics of suspicion, when you treat certain ways of moving in the world as the only ways to move in the world, right? Then you're always using the hammer and everything looks like a nail. And I think what Sedgwick to me offers isn't a promise of like there are a lot of tools in the toolbox. Sometimes you need a hammer, right? Because sometimes you're dealing with a nail. But sometimes you're dealing with something else and you need like, you need like a screw, you need a wrench. You need something else, right? Sometimes you can just leave that thing in there and put something else up somewhere else. Like we need more tools. I'm not here to tell people don't use those tools. Those tools have done a lot of work. Those tools have made a better future for us. I live in the world built by some of those tools, and they have made my life habitable. So I'm not here to say don't do stuff. I mean, I am sometimes saying don't do stuff. That's what I think you should do. But if you want to do that stuff, go do it. I'm just saying maybe we can do something else. And I think we should become more creative about thinking about something else and give each other room to do something else and not get mad at each other for doing something else. But be maybe a little open to like, that's a dance move I didn't anticipate.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see what happens.
But I think you're also coming from a place of hope. And I think we are dealing with a time where, for a lot of people, that feels either impossible or in very short supply. And so I think there's a repositioning as well, where one has to feel again that the fundamental values are A, deeply committed to and inalienable, and furthermore, possible.
Yeah.
And that's something I wonder about as well.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it comes from hope. It comes from desperation. I desperately want us to win.
Yeah.
And I think we don't have a lot of time to try to turn this. I mean, I feel anxious about the kind of authoritarian practices they're trying to entrench. And but I get it. I mean, we're living in such a moment of continual and excessive violence and harm and daily, attacks that make you just feel like everything is collapsing. And under those kinds of conditions of scarcity and violence and crisis, a feeling of ongoing crisis, we feel scared and angry and freaked out all the time. And so to even try to talk about abundance and to talk about something anti-eliminationist might feel kind of impossible, right? It might feel like, but I actually feel like what it is a refusal to dance to their song. Like I feel like what I view it as is we have to stop dancing to their tune.
I agree. I
And
agree.
that, and
We
I,
have to
so for
play a
me, it's
different
like
game. Yes.
we have to play a different game. And
Yes.
and so that might mean moving in ways that feel uncomfortable and uncertain and weird and not as pleasurable, or maybe we're cultivating new pleasures.
Sure.
But we have to, I mean, I think we just have to, I just think because this is not working. Like we are losing. We are losing majorities. This is not working. It's not working just because we haven't, I mean, I hope 2024 should be a bit of it was a very disorienting wake-up call for a lot of us that I think always thought, especially in 2020, after that, in 2016, after that election, thought, no, we're the majority. We're the majority. And this guy won in a kind of fluke and terrible other alternative candidate. And there were so many reasons why that election felt like a mistake almost, right? Like he won, he did win. He won by the electoral college, but he didn't win the majority of voters. He didn't win. And
Yeah.
this win shows that we are not winning enough of the argument.
Sure.
It doesn't mean that we're not winning a lot of people. A lot of people believe in the world millions of people believe in the world we believe in, but we are not winning enough. And we're kind of in this really, dangerous moment where we have to like, we can't just double down on old strategies. We've got to think
Agree.
anew. And I think that's how we think anew is where the arguments are going to happen. And I want everybody to pitch in and like, what do you think is going to get us out of this? These are just my thoughts. I don't know if they're right. I think they're right. I feel very passionately they're right, but they're mine. This is one political theorist who's read a bunch of stuff and has one view of the world, but other people have other views. And I think, but I think there's a growing number of people who are trying to think about non-elimination, non-domination, freedom, pleasure, desire. I think there's a cohort of thinkers and activists who know that what we've been doing haven't been working and want to do
Yeah.
something better, and that gives me hope. And I think millions of people think this is not working
Yeah.
and they don't like it either. And some of them voted for Trump and they don't like it either. But thus far they're not fully bought into what's on offer by liberals or by what's on offer by the left. So I think that's how do we build something? That is the big, but it could be an exciting moment of our thinking couldn't be more important. But I'm really scared and alarmed and constantly fearful too. So It's all I'm having all the feelings. I'm sure, like you, we're having all the feelings. Um,
We are. But I think, with that as well, I do think just throwing it on top, right? There is a level of human suffering that we are doing beyond the prison industrial complex that we had, you
yeah.
know, um, understood was part of the way America functioned beyond general gender and racial
Oh
subjugation,
yeah.
like the pointed suffering that we are condoning, espousing, allowing to go on right now. I do think there is a collective weight to the consciousness
Oh my
of
God.
that, and I think it is a burden and something we will have to reckon with later. It's sort of like you're watching the check being cashed, and you're like, I don't know how we make this right. What we're
Yeah.
doing right now.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that's exactly right. And I think it's to really sit with the fact that there's going to be just real legacies of all this harm.
Yes. Yes.
Even if we pull out of some of this stuff, its legacies are ongoing.
Yes.
It's creating there's a wake to this, right? There's going to be an ongoingness that we're going to have to that is not it, the harm a lot of the harm has been done, right? And
Yes.
so that we will have to make our way in a different world where that happened. And I think one thing we have to really think about is that if people find themselves that right now so many people are doing so much harm or condoning so much harm, not even just doing it, but condoning it or not knowing what else to do or making excuses for it because this harm seems somehow deeply connected to the only way they think they can feel safe and free and have a future speaks to the fact that we so need to provide other ways people can feel pleasure and safe and have a future. We have to give them something else to hold on to so that the people who still see the world in those really reductionist ways, I think a lot of those people could be oriented to hold on to something better. And then there's a certain segment of them that can't. So we are in this moment of we have to persuade a lot of people to a new future because we actually do believe in building majorities, not picking our voters, right? But we also believe in like fighting fire with fire because you can't just you can't meet up with the gerrymandering. I totally agree with what Gavin Newsom is doing. You can't agree. You can't answer fascism or authoritarian takeover with like half loaf goo goo good government arguments. You got to fight fire with fire. To quote my colleague Libby Anchor, you have to go low, right? Because you're trying to win a future that is possible. So it's going to be complicated strategically, but we have to offer people a form of pleasure and futurity and safety that offers them something better. And that means defeating these people. And when I say defeat them, I don't mean that they don't exist. I mean, we make them smaller and weaker. We make them non-majoritarian. That's my vision. I would love to have a world where they all disappear and nobody in the world doesn't, a world where everyone thinks everything I think all at the same time. But that's a child's fantasy. That's a
Right.
child's fantasy, right? The real world is that lots of people don't think the way I think, and I'm okay with that. I can live
But
in
I
a world.
think the
Live with
caveat is that they tolerate you and you tolerate them, and then
it.
that's okay.
That's exactly it. Lauren Berlant says we live in a condition of non-sovereign relationality,
Yeah.
which is the fancy way of saying other people are really inconvenient
Yeah.
to us and even unbearable to us, and yet they must be born, and
Yes.
yet we have to like we ultimately no one's going away. I think that's the real fundamental about a non-eliminationist politics is if you have a political vision involving some people disappearing,
Yeah.
that's a problem because guess what? We're all here.
Right.
No one's leaving. We're all here. And you need to build a political future that acknowledges that we're all here. And I want to build a political future where we're all here and as many of us as possible thrive. And if a lot of us don't agree with your world, you can still live in your world. You can still not have an abortion. You can still homeschool your kids. You can still be a trad wife. You can still live in your world. I don't need you to love my trans futurity or the world that I want to inhabit. You just can't take away the rights of the people I love, right? But you can build your world. You just can't take away my world. And so
Yes.
I think that is the kind of future we need to like offer and say, so I'm going to fight to like defeat you politically because your winning is my erasure. But I want you to know that my winning is not your erasure. And I think we need to be incredibly explicit about that. And if anybody who out here is listening and they have been envisioning a future that involves some people's erasure, I would say we probably don't share a common politics. And I would invite you to maybe try to think in a way that doesn't involve anybody's erasure,
Right.
because that's white supremacy. And you don't want to be in their head. You want to be in yours.
Right.
That's what I would offer.
I agree. But I think to your point as well, the left needs a very clear set of beliefs, and
Hmm.
those are the beliefs. Because I will say the Republicans are so good at unifying around basic values, and
Yeah.
we are a mess at that.
Yeah, though I will say, I mean, this might just be tactical differences, but I will say they are weirdly abundant. I really hope you have Dan Hosang and Joe Lowndes on, who they're writing a edited volume that I'm very lucky to be in on the multiracial right that's coming out soon. And they wrote an earlier book, which I'm going to get the whole name wrong. It's like Producers, Patriots, and Parasites, or those three words in it in some order that I'm not quite sure. But and they have been going into right-wing spaces, right? They go to a CPAC and they go to a lot of these turning point events. And I would really invite you to talk to them, because one of the things they show is that the right now is simultaneously unified and a hot mess inside. And they are actually inviting in so many different kinds of people. They're like, oh, you're in it because you're a Maha wellness influencer. You don't agree with me on immigration or guns, but you agree with me on vaccines. So come on in. And then these people, they only say this, but they don't agree with me on this. And they bring in this very heterodox group of people, all of whom feel policed by the left, or they feel unhappy with this or that in the world. They have suspicions about big pharma, which a lot of us have. They have suspicions about science, that a lot of us have critiques of science. And they've welded it into some vision of the world that I think is profoundly wrong and anti-science, but also understands that some stuff is seriously broken about science and pharmaceuticals. And they've constructed a kind of conservative politics around it. And the right is like, come on in. And it brings in all these different people who feel lots of different feelings.
Right.
And by bringing them in and not holding any lines practically,
Right.
they just say, come on in, say all your weird, crazy shit. Everybody's invited to the party. And then they get there and they hear some really ugly messaging, some real scarcity logics and eliminationist stories. And those people who came from very different reasons start to hear that story. And that story starts to get welded into their other stories. And that's how you build a big coalition of right-wing people who think a lot of things, but hold together politically,
Right.
right? And so our job is to start pulling those people away, right? And so I think we have to be really strategic about how do we pull them away? What are the
Right.
strategies?
Right.
But if you talk to them, the thing that I was so struck by, and it really sits with me, is how, and they came there, right? One of them is white, one is non-white. They came with two grad students who were doing dissertations on these issues, two of whom were women of color.
Mm.
And those women of color were welcomed with all kinds of open arms. And those women felt very accepted in that space. And those women are avowedly anti-fascist, radical women of color, progressives. But those women are thinking about the organizational strategies on the right. So that's all I say to that thing about the question of, I think when you're in a movement, your movement always feels messy and ridiculous and stupid and screwing up. And then when you look at the other side, they always look united and unified and strategic and so smart. And inside, it's so much messier. But there's also stuff to learn there, and there's stuff
Right.
they could learn from us. And I don't want them to learn from us and I think there's some things that we can do that they can't do, and that's why actually I think it's really important to be anti-eliminationist and engage in the politics of non-domination, because I don't think they can do their politics without being eliminationist. I
Right.
think I think domination and elimination is constitutive to the authoritarian DNA. I think it's their DNA. So you can't be a non-eliminationist Nazi, right? Putin can't be non-eliminationist.
Right.
He can't be non-domination. But we can, right? I think that's the thing that makes me hopeful. We can. So we have something to fight for.
I agree with you. I do agree with you. And I think I'm going to think more about all of your suppositions. And then is there a way to implement this and what would it look like? So I will give this a lot more consideration.
Yeah,
So I
me too.
appreciate this part
Me
of our
too.
discussion. I really hope that people get the intent out of this, which is not just to fall in line, but rather to just consider.
Yeah. Exactly. I mean, I think you're really opening up a space for that. And I love that we were able to be like, this is what I worry about. Well, this is what I worry about. And they're all legitimate and they're all like, oh yeah. One of my really good friends, George Schulman, who's another political theorist, he's always saying, when I give him my vision of the world, and he's like, yeah, but what's the price of the ticket? Like you're
That's
describing this
fair.
world and I like it, but what are the costs of your vision? And I'm like, yeah, shit, I got to think about that. So it's important to keep these spaces open, right? Yeah.
Well, the big thing too I'm trying to think about is how do we get more normal people to run for government? Because I feel like that has to happen.
Yes, the only thing I have kept, I was giving money before the election and my panic of this election. And now the only thing I'm still giving a monthly donation to is Run for Something
Right.
because yeah, we need people to think about serving not for the rest of their lives, but like be a city council person, be in the state senate, be in Congress, do it for 10 years, 5 years, 20 years, but like different levels of engagement, but just normal people running and serving and then doing other things. We so need to build that. And I think yeah, just that's a long version of yeah. Absolutely.
I really, really appreciate all your time today. We went way over, so
I
thank
know
you.
we're
But
two
also,
hours. It was like a long.
I love it. I'm
This is
I'm down for it.
Joe Rogan level podcasting. We
Different subject matter, yes, but I agree. But also there's so much to consider. Like I felt so fraught before the podcast because I just thought like, there's a weight. There's just a weight right now and it's hard,
Absolutely.
you know?
Absolutely. Well, thank you for doing this. I think the people you've interviewed, I mean, you're bringing a really rich. I love the move, popular culture, politics. Like we need that, and I think podcasting is some of the smartest work going on right now because people listen. They listen while they're cooking, while they're driving, it incorporates politics in their like lives in these easy way, in these like very accessible, pleasurable ways. You're giving people pleasure, and many pieces do not do that. Many ways of talking to people don't do that. But speaking of the weight, I'll let you go. But do you know about this film about Russia called My Undesirable Friends?
No, maybe
Um,
not.
it's called My Undesirable Friends. Part one is called Last Air in Moscow,
Okay.
and it's playing here at the Film Forum, so it's probably playing at some
Yeah.
indie place in the Bay Area. But it's about this woman interviewed people, the Russian Free Press,
Mm,
right before the war in Ukraine, which basically
mm.
caused the entire free press and civil society of Russia to leave, right, to seek exile. It's incredibly dark because you feel like you're watching our history right now, but it also makes you realize what we have to do to avoid that and maybe why we're somewhat different. It was incredibly moving. It's 5 hours total. You have to go
Wow.
twice because one section's three and one section's two.
Okay.
So it's a lot. But I read the Times review and the person sort of said in passing, like, I think this is the most important um, political film of the next little, I mean, just like of a generation kind of thing. And I just think it has so many resonances with what you were feeling of like the heaviness of this
Yeah.
moment. I thought it was brilliant. So if you're looking to be both depressed and moved, I think you should see this film and mark out a lot of time
This
because
that seems to be the order of the day, generally speaking, right? It's like I need a little bit of hope, but I gotta also
it's gonna take some
acutely
time.
understand where we are.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Well, thanks so much, Chloe.
Well, oh my gosh, we'll meet again. I look forward
Yes.
to it. Have a wonderful time finishing up your book, and I can't wait to see it.
Thank you so much. And I'll see and send this to me when it's in its
Of
final
course.
form and I can't wait.
Me too. Thank you
Okay,
very, very much. Take
bye.
care.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.